lost my mouth, driving me in and you kicking me out. You got my head spinning, no kidding, I can't pin you down. What's going on, the beautiful mind? I'm on your magical mystery ride, and I am so dizzy, don't know what hit me, but I'll be alright. My head's underwater, but I'm breathing fine. You're crazy and I'm out of my mind, 'cause all of me loves all of you. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me, I give my all to you. You're my end and my beginning. Even when I lose, I'm winning, 'cause I give you all of me, and you give me all of you. How many times do I have to tell you? Even when you're crying, you're beautiful too. The world is beating you down. I'm around through every mood. You're my downfall, you're my muse, my world distraction, my rhythm and blue. That can't stop singing is ringing in my head for you. My head's underwater, but I'm breathing fine. You're crazy and I'm out of my mind, 'cause all of me love all of you. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me, I give my all to you. You're my end and my beginning. Even when I lose, I'm winning, 'cause I give you all of me, and you give me all of you. Oh, give me all of you, 'cause on the table we both saw in hers, risking it all through his heart. 'Cause all of me loves all of you. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me, I give my all to you. You're my end and my beginning. Even when I lose, I'm winning, 'cause I give you all of me, and you give me all of you. Oh. Thank you.
You say you love me, I say you're crazy. We're nothing more than friends. You let me love her, you're like a brother. I know you're so sweet and light, and don't waste it all talking that shit. Only gonna force me away. That's it. When you say you love me, I say you're crazy. Here you go again. Don't go look at me with that look in your eye. You really ain't going away without a fight. You can be reasonable. Haven't I made it clear? Want me to spell it out for you? F-R-I-D-N-D-S. Haven't I made it obvious? Haven't I made it clear? Want me to spell it out for you? F-R-I-D-N-D-S. F-R-I-D-N. Have you got no shame? You looking insane, turning up at my door. It's 2 in the morning, the rain is pouring. The empty been here before. Yeah, don't mess it up, talking that shit. Only gonna boost me the way, that's it. When you say you love me, that make me crazy. Here we go again. Don't go look at me with that look in your eye. You really ain't going nowhere without a fight. You can be reasoned with them, don't be in the lie. I told you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 times. Haven't I made it obvious? Haven't I made it clear? Want me to spell it out for you? F-R-I-D-N-D-S. Haven't I made it obvious? Haven't I made it clear? Want me to spell it out for you? F-R-I-D-N-D-S. F-R-I-D-N. F-R-I-E-N-D-S. That's how you spell friend. F-R-I-E-N-D-S. Get that shit inside your head. Oh, F-R-I-E-N-D-S.
We're just friends.
So don't go look at me with that look in your eye. You really ain't going nowhere without a fight. You can be reasoned with that, don't be in the lie. I told you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 times. Haven't I made it obvious? Haven't I made it clear? Want me to spell it out for you? F-R-I-D-N-D-S. Haven't I made it obvious? Haven't I made it clear? Want me to spell it out for you? F-R-I-D-N-D-S. F-R-I-D-N. You saw me down, but we're from Came it out, but you are further too far. Got out and I didn't learn. Raise your voice, this and on me, break my bone. I'm shocked and learn, I said it. I'm pulling from nothing to lose. Fight away. Ricochet, you change your arm. Fight away. You set me down, but we're fine. I'm titanium. You set me down, but we're fine. I'm I'm titanium. Start hand, machine gun, fry run to run, who run? Start hand, I'm pulling through blood. You saw me down, but
Let it tiny
Thank you, student. Thank you, student, for the great music performance. And we apologize for commencing late due to the heavy traffic this early morning. Honorable guests, distinguished speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome you all to the third Language Teaching and Learning Today annual conference hosted by Faculties of Foreign Languages, University of Technology and Education.
This year, LTLT 2019 brightly focuses on autonomy and motivation, the two crucially important attributes of language learners in the interconnected world. LTLT 2019 is expected to document creative practices and insightful perspectives of teachers and students in different contexts. It also aims at bringing together experts, researchers, lecturers, teachers and students in the area of linguistics and language teaching from different teaching and learning contexts for better understanding of developments in their expertise and the sustainable development of quality learning, as well as facilitate our professional development progress and improve our services to the community.
It is an honor for me to introduce and welcome the guests at our table. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Trương Bạch Lê, Vice Dean of Faculties of English, College of Foreign Languages, Huế University. Dr. Trần Quốc Thao, Ho Chi Minh University of Technology. Dr. Lê Thị Thùy Nhung, Ho Chi Minh City Banking University.
Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Dương Mỹ Thẩm, Faculty of Foreign Languages, University of Agriculture and Forestry. Dr. Nguyễn Thị Thanh Hà, Ho Chi Minh City Open University. Dr. Bùi Thị Thục Quyên, Ho Chi Minh City Open University.
Mrs. Trần Nguyễn Thành Nguyên and Mrs. Phan Thị Hồng Mẫn, English Language Coordinator from U.S. Consulate General, Ho Chi Minh City.
On the sponsor side, it's my pleasure to present Ms. Nguyễn Thị Như Thủy, Product Manager from Đại Trường Phát Education. Ms. Nguyễn Phạm Mai Trâm, Marketing Representative from Macmillan Education.
Mr. Lê Quốc Kiệt, Marketing Manager from Hello Language Center. Mrs. Mai Võ Trúc Phương, Representative from Cảnh Quan Việt. And last but not least, we welcome all the presenter and participants of Language Teaching and Learning Today 2019.
Honorable guests, distinguished speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to listen to the opening speech delivered by the Dean of Faculty of Foreign Languages, Ho Chi Minh City, University of Technology and Education. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Đặng Tấn Tiến.
Honorable guests, researchers, teachers, and colleagues, a very good morning. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to warmly welcome you to Language Teaching and Learning Today conference series. This year, the LTLT 2019 aims at exploring autonomy and motivation for language learning in the interconnected world. These two attributes have been believed to make enormously significant effects on language learning, particularly in the context of interconnectedness and interdependence. This forum is to offer researchers and practitioners like you from different teaching and learning situations a unique opportunity to share your local insights and dialogue with other international perspectives. Today, it is our great pleasure to host 40 presentations, including research papers, training workshops, and posters, which have been rigorously reviewed and recommended by our International Review Committee. The conference proceedings has also received tremendously wonderful support from the Editorial Review Committee, whose members have worked long days and nights for the publication to be now ready for you. The UTE-TV 2019 is particularly honored with the participation of stakeholders from various parts of Vietnam and the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our privilege to welcome so many professionals, researchers, colleagues, students, and stakeholders in the area of English language teaching and learning today, joining the conference. UTE-TV is an initiative of Faculty of Foreign Languages, Ho Chi Minh City University of Technology and Education, in facilitating and empowering the professional communities of language education and research. UTE-TV 2019 is highlighted by a keynote from Associate Professor Garo Murray and two other plenary speakers, Dr. Hafiza Kasim and Dr. Nguyễn Đức Chỉnh. The conference examines the concepts of learner autonomy and learning motivation in a challenging context of globalization and interconnectedness with the support of technologies. It provides reports on various ideologies and practices of language teaching and learning from specific situations. The Z generation learners nowadays often involved in different spaces at the same time, even though when they are physically resided in the same physical space. Their life engagement tends to frequently travel among spaces or communities of interest. Consequently, they can be easily distracted and driven away from the learning activities, particularly when the learning is conventionally uncomfortable. This urges teachers to develop and maintain students' capacity for learner autonomy and their learning motivation for better learning engagement. Therefore, it is important to consider the local strategies and making suggestions for further effective pedagogies. Finally, I would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the organizing committee, reviewers, guest speakers, presenters, students, volunteers, and other colleagues for their amazing dedication to the event. I also want to extend my gratitude to Hello English Center, Đại trường Pháp Education Group, Macmillan Education, and Cảnh Quang Việt Company for their generous sponsorship. In addition, my gratefulness is forwarded to the media team of Ho Chi Minh City University of Technology and Education for covering the event and getting it on air. Particularly, please allow me to thank all special guests and participants from different institutions for coming and sharing their expertise with us today. Now, I would like to invite our generous sponsors to the stage for a token of appreciation. I would like to invite Ms. Nguyễn Thị Như Thủy, Production Manager from Đại Trường Phát Education, Ms. Nguyễn Phạm Mai Trâm, the Marketing Representative from Macmillan Education to the stage, Mr. Trương Quốc Kiệt from Hello Language Center, and Ms. Mai Võ Trúc Phương from Cảnh Quang Việt. Could you please move forward to the stage?
Another indispensable force that contributing to the success of the conference is the distinguished speakers. Please join me to welcome to the stage today the keynote and two featured speakers to receive flowers and gifts from the conference organizer. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Associate Professor Carol Murray, Dr. Nguyễn Đức Chỉnh, Dr. Hafizur Kasim.
May I invite Dr. Đặng Tấn Tín, President of the Dean of Faculty of Foreign Languages, University of Technology and Education, to come to the stage to present the flower and gifts to the honorable speakers. Thank you, honorable speakers. Thank you, Dr. Đặng Tấn Tín.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. It is always a great opportunity to share what we are doing with other colleagues at the conferences. As you may know, in 2011, I received a special award from the International Association of Applied Linguistics to present a paper at the ILERT World Congress. It is the place where I first met a special expert on the area of my research interest. although I had already read about him and his work much before that. My first impression on him is a very friendly character. He demonstrated himself very consistent with the social cultural theory and the concept of learner autonomy that he has written about. Time flies so fast. It has been 8 years since our first meeting in Beijing. And very luckily, we have him here with us today. Everyone, I would like to present to you Associate Professor Garo Murray, a leading researcher on learner autonomy in language education. His work primarily focuses on social learning spaces, narrative inquiry, and complexity theory. His books on the social dimension of learner autonomy and learning motivation have been influential, provoking a lot of other research in the area. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Associate Professor Garo Murray for a keynote speech of the conference today.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming today. And I'd also like to thank those of you who are joining us from a distance. Thank you for taking the time from your work to listen to what I have to say. Am I holding this too close? Too close? Closer. I'd like to begin by thanking the conference organizers for their kind invitation. This is my first time in Vietnam. I'm delighted to be here. Everybody has been so kind, so welcoming. Thank you very much. And And I would also like to thank the young performers this morning. What a lovely idea to put us all in a relaxed mood before we begin the day's festivities. Okay, my talk this morning is what can we learn about learner autonomy by looking at it from the perspective of complex dynamic systems theory. Now, to look at this question, I'm going to tell you about 3 research projects that I've been carrying out over an 8-year period. And these research projects were carried out in a social learning space on the campus of a large national university in Japan. And I'm going to use these projects to illustrate what I've learned about learner autonomy and how my thinking has changed over the years. Here's the outline for the talk this morning. I'm going to begin by providing you background information. I'm going to tell you about the learning space, what I mean by a learning space. I'm going to outline the studies, and then I'm going to discuss the theoretical orientation and how that changed over time. In the second part of the workshop presentation, I'm going to address the question directly, what can be learned or what have I learned about learner autonomy by looking at it from the perspective of complex dynamic systems theory. And then in the third part of the talk, I'm going to look at the implications for practice and further inquiry. Now, I'm going to begin with background information, but before I do that, I'd like to contextualize what I have to say by telling you a little bit about my experience in the area of learner autonomy. First of all, I have been a language teacher all my life. In Canada, where I come from, I taught junior high and high school English as a second language, and then after moving to Japan, I taught English as a foreign language at university level. Now, at universities in Japan, one of the things that I did was develop and deliver self-directed learning courses. At Akita International University in particular, I developed 2 self-access centers. Over the years, everything that I've done has been influenced by the work of the French academic Henri Olick. Now, Olick defined learner autonomy as the ability to take charge of one's learning. And for Olick, to take charge of one's learning meant to accept responsibility for all aspects of that learning, determining objectives, defining content, selecting methods, techniques, strategies, monitoring procedure of acquisition, how often, where, when, and evaluating what has been acquired. So in my talk this morning, when I refer to Olick's model, this is what I'm referring to. When I was working at Akita International University in northern Japan, I was presented with a golden opportunity. And that opportunity was to develop a self-access center which would be open to the general public. And as you can see, we had materials for language learning. But one of the things that I learned at that center was that the people who came there, business people, housewives, students preparing for entrance examinations, for the people who came, the most important aspects of the center were the social interaction and the learning opportunities that that interaction generated. That was a turning point for me, because through this work, I came to see the potential of self-access centers as social learning spaces. When I moved to Okayama University in Japan, they were actually developing a social space for language learning. And this is what I would like to do now. I'd like to tell you about this space at Okayama University. The social learning space is called the El Cafe, and by social learning space, I mean a place where learners can come together in order to learn with and from each other. And they do at the El Cafe. International students and Japanese students come together. They come to relax, they come to have lunch, they come to study, sometimes they come to work on group projects. The El Cafe is primarily a social space, although as you can see in the photos, there are materials for language learning. The El Cafe started out in, oops, wrong direction. Mike, what's happened here? Okay, sorry about that. We're back on track, I think, now. The El Cafe started out in 2009 as the English Cafe, and as you can see from the photo, the English Cafe, it had a very modest beginning, as these spaces usually do. The idea originally was to create a space where Japanese students could practice their English in a relaxed, comfortable environment. This meant inviting international students. International students wanted to learn Japanese. They also brought with them their languages: Korean, Chinese, French, German, Vietnamese, Thai, etc. So over the years, the English Cafe evolved into the El Cafe. One of the key features, so in my talk this morning, you're going to hear me mention English Cafe sometimes, and other times El Cafe. Please don't be confused. It's the same institution. Think of it as on a continuum. English Cafe slowly changed, progressed, expanded, and became what we call the El Cafe today. One of the key features of both the English and the El Cafe have been the small-sized, non-credit language classes taught in the late afternoon and early evenings. These classes focus on communication and test preparation, and they're taught by other students, Japanese students and international students, many of whom hope to become language teachers in the future. There's also a series of events offered throughout the year, In my mind, the event season kicks off in October with the arrival of the new international students. This is followed by a series of parties, Halloween party, Christmas party, in the spring, cherry blossom viewing party, and Star Festival in the summer, and other things. Now, my colleagues and I have been studying the development of the facility, and I'd like to just briefly outline the studies that we did. And when I say we, I'm talking about my colleagues at Okayama University, Naomi Fujishima and Mariko Uzuka, and I'm very grateful for their collaboration on these projects. Not long after the English Cafe opened, we began a narrative inquiry, and the idea was to explore the learning opportunities available in this new facility on campus. This turned out to be a pilot study because the next year we received a grant from the Japanese Ministry of Education, which enabled us to extend the study for an additional 4 years. Now, I know you know that having money is a very good thing. And in our case, having money enabled us to hire senior students as research assistants. And they did the participant observation for us. They did over 1,000 hours of observation and wrote up observation reports. We interviewed these students, the administrators, teachers who offered language support, and international students, anyone at the end of each semester. Having money also enabled us to expand the study to include a multiple case study. And in the multiple case study, we tracked the language learning trajectories of 13 Japanese students from the time they entered the university until they graduated. They wrote language learning histories, we interviewed them at the end of each semester, and they also sat for the TOEIC. When these two studies wrapped up, we began a narrative inquiry, and we were able to collect stories from 16 people, administrators, teachers, students, and we were very fortunate to be able to have those stories published as an edited collection. I've done a lot of narrative inquiry, and the thing about narrative inquiry is you get these fabulous stories, but what do you do with them? There's no room in journal articles to tell stories as such. So we were very fortunate to be able to publish them and have all the contributors be published authors. I'm going to tell you what I've learned from these studies, but before I do that, I'd just like to briefly go over the theoretical orientation and show you how that expanded over time. Not long after the English Cafe opened, through our observation, it seemed quite obvious to us that a community of learners had formed. And at that time, our thinking was informed by the communities of practice concept. And communities of practice are groups of people who share a common concern or a set of problems or a passion about a topic, and who deepen their knowledge and expertise by interacting on an ongoing basis. And that is exactly what we saw at the El Cafe, and later what we saw at the English Cafe, and later at the El Cafe, groups of students who shared a common goal, learning a foreign language, and who deepened their knowledge and expertise as they interacted on a daily basis and participated in these projects. Now, from the beginning, our focus was on the English Cafe as a space or an environment that offered learning opportunities. And around this time, in the field of ecology, in the field of applied linguistics, ecology was trending. And I was reading things like Claire Crampsh's book and Leo Van Leer's book, and it seemed to me that ecology was a very good fit for our study of the English Cafe. Now, the thing about an ecological approach is that the learners and their learning are viewed as part of the environment. So adopting an ecological approach, we came to see the El Cafe as an eco-social system comprised of the learners and their learning. Now, the other thing about an ecological approach, it inspired us to shift our focus from learning opportunities to affordances for language learning. Now, in an ecosystem, affordances are defined as opportunities for action that emerge through the animal's interaction with the environment. Now, it's important to note, affordances are not something just there in the system for students to take advantage of. Rather, it's through their interaction that affordances emerge. So ecology brought us closer to a complex dynamic systems approach in that it introduced us to constructs such as emergence, systems, and networks of interdependencies. So rather than say that we adopted a complex dynamic systems approach, it's probably more accurate to say that complex dynamic systems theory slipped into our thinking construct by construct. And perhaps it's ironic, but the way we came to accept complex dynamic systems theory is the way that researchers present it in their studies. There's no clear, concise definition of this body of theory. So what happens is researchers, when they are reporting on their work, they summarize elements of this body of theory that were relevant for their inquiry. And that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to tell you just briefly about the elements of complex dynamic systems theory that we found appropriate for our studies. In the first place, there's one characteristic of all complex dynamic systems, and this is they're comprised of many components which interact. So it's important to understand that you can't understand a complex dynamic system by studying these individual components. Rather, the system is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's through interaction that the system is generated. So we soon came to realize that we couldn't understand the El Cafe as a learning environment by studying individual students. Now, as I mentioned, it's through their interaction that the El Cafe emerged as a learning environment. And this leads us to another construct of complex dynamic systems, emergence. Emergence occurs as the elements of a system interact. Through their interaction, the elements can self-organize to produce something all on their own without outside direction. So something all on their own sounds very close to learner autonomy. Now, this process is called emergence, and for it to occur, autonomy has to be present in the environment. The elements have to have room to move around and self-organize. Another feature of complex dynamic systems is that they're made up of different levels of organization. Elements on one level self-organize to produce something new on a different level. And this is exactly what we saw happening at the El Cafe. On a physical level, the administration had made this space available, they'd furnished it, and then the students started coming. And through their interaction, they created a kind of learning space that the university administration had not foreseen. In her study in the narrative inquiry, the manager of the El Cafe wrote that she could not have predicted what the El Cafe would become. So this suggests another feature of complex dynamic systems. They're not linear. Because all the elements of a system are interrelated, a small change in one element can have a large impact on the system. Now, in the literature, this is referred to as the butterfly effect. And the example they give is that a butterfly flapping its wings somewhere in South America can set in motion a series of events which can cause severe weather conditions in the United States. But ladies and gentlemen, the opposite is also true. Something that has seems to have a major event can have very little impact on the system. And I've seen this happen over and over again in the field of education. Somebody comes along, a government changes, somebody has this idea, they're going to change the education system. It's going to be great. Everyone's going to do something different. But what happens is the system adapts to the point where it neutralizes and the impact, the changes aren't really that great. Now at the El Cafe, on a smaller level, every year we have new international students come, and through their interaction, they create a group personality which can have a big impact on the atmosphere of the El Cafe. But guess what? A few months later, they go. Another group comes. So the impact may not be lasting. The El Cafe remains. So systems, so this suggests another element of complex dynamic systems. They adapt to change. As they're exposed to influences from outside and experience the process of emergence from within, they adapt. So change is pretty much a constant feature of complex dynamic systems. A final point I want to make is that complex dynamic systems draw on the energy and resources of everybody who comes there, and from outside sources. At the El Cafe, an example of this, it draws on the energy and resources of everybody who comes there. Us as researchers, administrators, teachers, international students, and Japanese students. A final point I'd like to make before I move on is that I've talked about three bodies of theory: complex dynamic systems, ecology, and communities of practice. They're all interrelated. They all overlap. They're not necessarily three separate bodies of theory. Complexity researchers Capra and Luisi, they write, social organizations can be complex dynamic systems when they're communities of practice. So a community of practice will most likely be a complex dynamic system, and a complex dynamic ecosystem will most likely be a community of practice. What I would like to do now is turn to the central question: what have I learned about learner autonomy by looking at it from the perspective of complex dynamic systems theory? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've learned a lot of things, but I can only talk about three this morning. First of all, I learned about autonomy and the process of emergence. Autonomy emerges from the interaction of many elements in the learning environment. And not only that, but autonomy has a crucial role to play in the process of complex emergence. Without autonomy in the environment, emergence is not going to happen. Secondly, I learned about autonomy and control, about how control and autonomy can operate together in a learning environment. You know, control is a problem for learner autonomy. Our classrooms and our learning centers are systems nested within larger systems. Control is often imposed by these larger systems. So adopting a complexity perspective gave me some insight into how we might deal with control. And thirdly, adopting a complexity perspective, I realized that there are many elements supporting the emergence of learner autonomy. And this morning, and I think these elements need further investigation. And this morning, I'm just going to point out four of them: space and place, feelings and embodiment, change, and imagination. I'm going to begin by talking about autonomy as an emergent phenomena and as an affordance for learning. In the early days, as I analyzed the transcripts from the first round of interviews in the ethnographic inquiry, I was very impressed to recognize the presence of autonomy in the environment and the importance that it had for the learners. We asked the participants in the study, and what does the English Cafe offer students in addition to the courses they can take at the university? And here we have a quote from Lena, a graduate student from Serbia who did research at the El Cafe. And I'm going to let you read that quote while I take a drink of water. Thank you. Please read the quote. Oh, you need to see the quote, don't you? Sorry. Other students that we interviewed mentioned in particular being able to leave the El Cafe when it suited them. So I think students probably feel captive having to sit in 90-minute classes and listen to a lecture, as you have to do this morning, for a long 45 minutes. So clearly autonomy was important for these students. They liked to have the They appreciated having the freedom to do as they pleased. But for autonomy to exist for these learners, they had to take action. At the English Cafe and later at the El Cafe, autonomy emerged as an affordance for learning as the learners interacted with the environment. So autonomy mediates the learner's interaction with the environment. Autonomy enables learners to act on affordances they perceive in ways that suit their sense of self. Now, I'm going to give you an example from the El Cafe. All through our studies, through our interviews, the number one affordance for learners was the potential to make friends. And within this affordance to make friends, there were a number of opportunities for language learning. For example, opportunities for language practice, opportunities for intercultural exchange, as well as to get help and support with lifestyle issues, linguistic issues, and homework. Now, the problem is, though, Japanese students are very shy. It's very, very difficult for a Japanese student to walk up to somebody they don't know and say, "Hi, I'm Yuji, nice to meet you." So they need to have a strategy. And a common strategy for Japanese students to approach an international student was to ask about the meaning of a vocabulary word, or to ask for an explanation of a grammar point. So the point is, autonomy enabled these learners to act on the affordance of friendship in ways that they perceived, ways that suited their sense of self. Now, however, having the autonomy to interact in the environment as they saw fit enables learners to participate in the emergence of affordances that otherwise would not have existed for them. And I'm going to give you an example, again, using the affordance of friendship, and I'm going to tell you about Komako. Komako was in her 4th year when the English Cafe opened, and she was there every day. All through her 4 years at university, Komako was determined to make friends with international students. Komako had a strategy, and her strategy was to enroll in classes where she knew international students would be. They would take these classes. She knew their program. But guess what? In those environments, in those teacher-controlled environments, Komako had no opportunity to make friends with international students. As a part of the emergence process, elements need to be able to move around and self-organize. So for the possibility of friendship to emerge as an affordance, the students needed to be able to move around and take the action that they felt was appropriate. So to summarize, autonomy plays this double-sided role. It enables learners to act on affordances that they perceive, and it also enables them to interact in the environment in ways that open up new opportunities or potential for language learning. The next point, do I keep going the wrong way here? I didn't have that up, did I? So, I'm looking at the wrong screen, sorry. Okay. I'll give you just a second to read that again, sorry. Okay, so as I was saying, autonomy plays this double-sided role. It enables learners to act on the affordances they perceive, but having the freedom to act in the environment as they see fit opens up new possibilities, new potential. Okay, what I would like to do now, so over the years, I've come to see autonomy as an emergent phenomena arising from the learner's interaction with the environment. Okay, now I'd like to turn to control and talk about autonomy and control. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with Phil Benson's definition of learner autonomy. And Benson defines autonomy as the capacity to take control of one's learning. Now, I have no problem with Phil Benson's definition. The problem I have is with the people who read it. Because what happens is they tend to stop there, okay? And so their focus tends to be on control. Control is like this monolith sitting on the road in front of people. They can't get over it, they can't get around it, they stop there. So this focus on control is too one-dimensional. I believe that systems of control and their elements are only some of the components that interact in the emergence of learner autonomy. And in helping me understand how autonomy and control operate in a learning environment, I turned to the research of two Canadians who at one time were at the University of British Columbia, now they've moved on. And they've done a lot of work in mathematics and English language arts classrooms. And through their research, they have identified elements which support complex emergence in educational settings. And I only have time to talk about two of these this morning: distributed control and neighbor interactions. In the English Cafe and the L Cafe, the manager distributed control and promoted neighbor interactions. She distributed control by hiring students to deliver the language lessons. She hired assistants, students to help her with administrative tasks, and she gave them the title assistant manager. She also engaged the students in decision-making on a daily basis, and again when major decisions had to be made. And an example of this is when the university administration made funding available to move the English Cafe to a much larger location. She asked the students what they would like to see included in this new space and to draw up floor plans. Well, as you might imagine, this engendered a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, a lot of neighbor interaction. But Davis and Samara point out that neighbor interactions are about the sharing of ideas and information. It's not about neighbors being in a close context physically, as we normally think about neighbors. At the El Cafe, as I said, the manager, she promoted neighbor interactions on a daily basis. And we asked in the study, the participants, what the manager had done to create a sense of community. And I'm going to show you another quote from Lena. She said, she's always trying to connect people. Like, why don't you try to talk to him about this? Or, you know, actually, he's really good at playing something. She's connecting the people that are there. The community creates itself. So Lena is absolutely right. The community was creating itself. These sharing of ideas and information, these neighbor interactions, were bringing people together and creating interconnections which bonded the elements of the complex social ecosystem. But I learned something else about autonomy here. Autonomy supports the flow of information, supports the emergence of autonomy. Japanese students, for example, they were getting information about study abroad. They were getting feedback on their spoken and written language, making them more autonomous communicators in the future. International students, they were getting help with banking and other lifestyle issues, as well as linguistic issues that enable them to function independently in this environment. So by encouraging the learners to share information and help each other, the manager was ensuring that they got the help they needed in the present and would be able to act more autonomously in the future. So the sharing of information distributes control and makes autonomous behavior possible. So in addition to distributed control and neighbor interactions, the studies revealed other elements which supported the emergence of autonomy. And I'm just quickly going to talk about 4 of those now. In the first place, space and place. As I mentioned, at one point, the university administration made funding available to move the English Cafe to a larger location, and it became the El Cafe. Well, the move to the larger space changed the social structure of the environment. The English Cafe, as you can see, was a small, narrow space. People tended to gather at 2 tables just inside the main entrance. At the El Cafe, people had room to move around, so they spread out. They formed groups. In our interviews just after the move, we asked the participants, what difference has this change in space made? And you, one of our research assistants, he said, we have small communities in El Cafe, even though we are in the same place. So these groups consisted of foreign language speakers and Japanese students who wanted to learn that language, as well as about their culture. So the English Cafe, the El Cafe, emerged as a complex dynamic ecosystem comprised of a network of communities of practice. But I learned something else here, which really surprised me. And it shouldn't have done, but it did. When I asked Xin Pei what difference the change in space made, he said there are like huge space. People can do more freely. There's more freedom. His comments are supported by those of a leading human geographer, and he wrote, "Spaciousness is closely associated with the sense of being free. Freedom implies space. It means having the power and enough room in which to act." So space and place have a role to play in the emergence of autonomy. But these comments, they raise certain questions for me. For example, what role do feelings play in the emergence of autonomy? Is it possible to feel autonomous? Do space and place have a role to play in triggering these feelings? What difference can a change in space make? Now, there's no doubt that how we feel in a space is important. When we asked one of our research assistants, Yaska, about the change in space, she said, "I think the participants have the room of their heart, because there are large, wide space." Now, Yaska was translating directly from Japanese, the expression, the room of one's heart. It means to feel relaxed, at ease, comfortable. And Yaska equates this change in space with freedom of movement and action. She said having the bigger space made it easier for people to move around and talk to each other. So the freedom to move around and talk to each other enabled the students to form these networks of communication, which are the basis of communities of practice. So Yaska's comments point to the role of feelings and space and place in the emergence of autonomy. For the learners in our study, in addition to feelings, autonomy was also linked to their hopes and dreams for the future. And I would argue that learners take responsibility for their learning and enact autonomous behaviors because of changes they want to make in their lives. Now, I'm going to show you a quote from a highly autonomous, self-directed learner, Mitsuo, and we asked the students in an interview, how are students who come to the El Cafe different from other students on campus? And Mitsuo said, "I think students who come to El Cafe are those who are not passive, who try to change something about themselves or about their future." During the last round of interviews in the ethnography, it was going to be my last chance to talk to the research assistants. So I asked Xin Pei. Xin Pei was a very successful language learner, and I asked him why he was so successful. And he said, "Just because I had a goal from when I was a freshman. I wanted to become English speaker, and I wanted to speak English well. I had this kind of motivation when I entered university, so I could study. I could keep studying by myself. I was always thinking about my future job." So these comments from Xin Pei and Mitsuo, for them, taking responsibility for their English language learning was related to their vision of a future self and their understanding of what they needed to do to make this future self a reality. So through their comments, we can see just one of the ways that autonomy is related to motivation. But autonomy is also related to imagination. When learners engage in the kind of hypothetical thinking that gives rise to future selves, they're using their imagination. And I'd like to show you a quote here from another Canadian, Kieran Egan, and he's done a lot of research on the role of imagination in education. And he writes, "It is by imagination that we make ourselves, seeing the directions in which we might move and the possible selves we might inhabit." So Egan suggests imagination helps us see the possibilities for transforming our visions into reality. So the emergence of affordances for language learning also relies on the imagination. The learners have to be able to see or perceive the possibilities in the environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, what are the implications of all of this for language learning? Well, I told you at the beginning that I was heavily influenced by the work of Henri Olick, and so I've spent many years helping learners form their self-directed learning plans. And the starting point for developing self-directed learning plans is goals. Learners need to know what their goals are. So because of the importance of goals, in the study, I often ask students, what are your goals for language learning? And each time, almost each time, the response was the same, a blank stare. And when I pressed the issue, the students would say, I don't have goals. I'd like to show you a quote from Kazunori, who is a very motivated, self-directed learner. And Kazunori had a dream. From the time he was in junior high school, he dreamed about studying abroad and learning English. And I was very fortunate to be able to interview him just as he was getting ready to go to Australia for 1 year to study. So he was making his dream a reality. And for the last time, I asked Kazunori about his goals. And he said, I don't know what my goals is. I'm doing just because I like it. I think there's no goal maybe in my case, because even though I think I can't master English, I like going for it. Always I'm thinking, I want to be like a native speaker. So Kazunori and the other learners in our study, they had goals. They just weren't pedagogical goals. Their goals were lifestyle goals rather than linguistic ones. So the point that I'm making here is that for these learners, their goals were on a different level of organization than the pedagogical level, which was the teacher's main concern. So I've come to think that we need to take a systems approach to learners and their learning. And I now look at learners and learning as purpose-driven, self-organizing dynamic systems moving through time and space. The learners in our study were drawing on all kinds of resources from outside the El Cafe and moving through all kinds of different locations. For example, they were participating in the El Cafe, they were taking language courses at the university, they were joining clubs, English-speaking clubs. Motivated by their goals, they were participating in these other systems and integrating these systems into their language learning system. However, viewing learners and their learning as open, self-organizing dynamic systems won't prevent me from encouraging them to identify their goals and to plan their learning. In other words, I'm still going to work with Holick's model. The only difference is I now see Holick's model as a potential dynamic system comprised of goals, materials, activities, and strategies. A system that's nested within the learner's social, cognitive, and biological system. And perhaps more importantly, as a teacher, for me, I've come to realize that work with Holick's model constitutes one level of organization nested within the learner's personal learning system. Okay, I'd like to move on now to look at the implications. Oh, I don't have time for that. I'd like to move on now and look at the implications for research. And I'm going to look at two things, research methods and lines of inquiry. Doing research from a complex dynamic systems perspective may require us to change our mindset. Researchers who take a reductionist approach work to identify and study the various elements of the object being investigated. Complexity researchers, on the other hand, want to understand how the interaction of the various parts gives rise to new patterns of behavior. And to do this, they employ retrodiction. Now, retrodiction means describing the present state of a system and then working backwards in order to understand how this state developed. So in our narrative inquiry, we saw the El Cafe as a complex dynamic ecosystem. So the question that we asked was, which elements in the system interacted and in what ways did they interact to produce the learning system that we saw, the El Cafe? Okay, what are the possible lines for future inquiry? Well, just about everything I've mentioned this morning needs to be researched. We need studies which explore learners, their learning, autonomy, and their motivation as complex dynamic systems. I'm sure you probably know that Dornier, most recently, he and his colleagues have proposed that motivation itself is a complex dynamic system. So we need studies that explore the role of autonomy in learners' complex motivational systems. We also need studies which explore motivation and autonomy as emergent phenomena arising from the interaction of cognitive, social, and environmental components. And there's a need for studies which identify these components. I've looked at 4 of them this morning, but this is just the beginning. Looking at learner autonomy from a complex dynamic systems perspective opens up any number of as yet unimagined lines of inquiry. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to conclude by going back to my initial question, what can we learn about learner autonomy by looking at it from a complex dynamic systems approach? Well, in the first place, autonomy is a complex dynamic system, an emergent phenomena, and arising from the interaction of a wide variety of elements and interconnected networks of environmental, cognitive, social, and biological systems. Adopting a complex dynamic systems approach will mean viewing learners and their learning as open, self-organizing systems driven by their visions of the person they want to become or the changes they want to make in their lives. As for Holig's model, I believe that it's still relevant after all these years. However, I think educators promoting Holig's model will need to be aware that it represents one system nested within the network of systems that make up learners and their learning. And a final comment, adopting a complex dynamic systems approach has convinced me more than ever of the importance of promoting learner autonomy and investigating its role in language learning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Now it's time for question and answer. If you have any inquiries, so please raise the question. Please.
Thank you. So I have one question. Can you hear me? So as you mentioned in your study, there are a lot of benefits of we can promote the autonomy thanks to the interaction and the collaboration. And but one thing that you mentioned in your presentation is that the the factor of change. Some group of students arrive and some group of students just gone, and some group of students they decided to stay there for a long time, about 4 years.
Yeah.
So did you examine why some group of students gone, some arrived, and
Okay.
some decided to stay?
Thank you for your question. That's a very good question. Very good question, because that's a very good question. The international students, of course, they had to go back to their home country to continue their studies, their program. Okay. As for the Japanese students, what we discovered with them, there were 3 reasons. They would start out coming very regularly in their first year and their second year, but near the end of the second year, they would stop coming. And this caused us great concern. And what we discovered was the reasons they stopped coming was, number one, near the end of the second year, their studies in their faculty increased. There was much more pressure put on them for their studies. Second of all, many of these students who wanted to learn English, everybody in Japan has a part-time job, okay? Japan operates on part-time workers, okay? So students, they finance themselves by doing part-time work. Some of the people who came to El Cafe had as many as 5 part-time jobs. Young Kazunori and Mutsuo, whom I mentioned, at times they had as high as 5 part-time jobs because their parents, we think of Japan as being a very wealthy country. Well, guess what? There are poor people in Japan. There are parents who are struggling to put their children through university. So if the students want to do something extra, they have to earn the money themselves. The other reason is that in Japan, club activities are a very important aspect of university life. For example, the current prime minister, the leaders of the LDP, many of them were members of the debating club at the University of Tokyo, okay? So you make contacts which support you for life through your club activities. So it's very important. Club activities can be extremely demanding. And with the Kohei Senpai system in Japan, as you get raised, spend more time in the club, you're meant to take on more responsibility because you're becoming a senior. So for these reasons, the students had very little time. Nobody in Japan has time, I think is one of the biggest problems we all face, okay? So that's why they change. Oh, and the other thing, a complex dynamic system is always changing. So people feed into it, they come, they go, it's a part of the process. So if you're starting a center and people stop coming or whatever, don't panic. It's life. This is what happens, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, participant. We know that you still have questions, but...
Yes, okay. So thank you. I wonder about how to run the El Cafe. As you said that. So I wonder if people come, for example, the people come to cafe, do they have to pay for some fee for getting the coffee? And or does it, you get the fund from the school, from the university to run this kind of cafe?
Okay. Good question. Money. You need money. Money is important. But you saw at the beginning, the English cafe, we had one room. Okay, but the university, we had a university president, vice president, we were quite lucky, who had a vision. And his vision was to create a space where Japanese students could practice their English in a relaxed, comfortable environment. So what he did, he set aside a small portion of his budget to hire the first manager to develop this center and some money to buy some furniture and some learning materials, and it was one room. And what happened was it became so popular and so many students, 200 students a day go there, that they had to expand. As for coffee, the English Cafe and the El Cafe were never really cafes, okay? Now, because of university regulations, these facilities were not allowed to have a kitchen. So we couldn't use the word kitchen, so we had a food preparation corner in the El Cafe and the English Cafe. And there were coffee-making facilities, tea-making facilities, there were snacks, there was ice cream in the fridge, that kind of thing. And students would put money in the box and take what they wanted. Now, in Japan, that can work because most people are very honest. So the students would leave their money and take what they wanted. So that's about the money issue. Okay?
Thank you, audience, for being so attentive. But due to the time limit, so probably you will be able to contact Professor Garo after this presentation in the break time. Thank you. Or then
I just want to say one thing. Yes, I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you. So if you do have a question, please don't hesitate to contact me or just approach me and talk to me. Thank you very much.
please stay remain on the stage, and we would like to invite Dr. Nguyễn Đình Thu, the former Dean of Faculty for Foreign Languages, to present the flowers to the keynote. Thank you.
On behalf of the Faculty of Foreign Languages and then the organizing committee, I would like to extend our warmest thanks for your very interesting, inspiring, and applicable presentation. And I hope, in order to help our students to be more autonomous, and which result in identity, and then we would like to offer them, to provide them with conducive environment learning support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Associate Professor Goro. It were very thought-provoking and relevant presentation. And I'm sure all of us in this room each relate every word that you mentioned. So I hope that you all enjoyed the conference so far, and it's almost time for morning coffee break. However, please spare us a few minutes. In your conference bags, you all noticed the printed program which set forth today's agenda and procedure we will follow. Please take a look at the topic of the concurrent session in your handout and join the session after the break. The concurrent session will start promptly after the coffee break at 10 o'clock.
Also, there is the Đại Trường Phát Education Solution leaflet with a code for 1-month trial account of online course Really English, a digital and blended ELT resources and platform for your reference.
Kindly remind you all that if you need to have your travel documents stamped, please contact the reception desk for guidance.
And also, the technical demonstrations from the conference sponsors, as well as the conference proceedings, are now being displayed by the main door of the Grand Hall and ready at hand for your reference and purchase.
Now it's time for the first raffle in this morning too. There is a number in your name tag for the morning and the afternoon lucky draw. Please copy the number in your name tag to the paper, the 3 papers that you provided in your name tag. And then insert one of them in the lucky draw box that locates at the end of the carpet, at the end of this room.
And also there's the reminder about the lunch. For those who already booked your lunch, after the concurrent sessions in the central building, please go down to the basement of the same building. The lunch is served in the canteen there.
The lucky draw will be executed after 10 minutes, so enjoy your tea break, and refreshments are served on the left wing. Please enjoy.